Hello and welcome back to Catalyze Yourself. I'm your host, Gayatri, and today we arrive at a powerful transition point in our journey. In the last few episodes, we walked together through the practices that allow us to return to ourselves through awareness, through presence, through conscious choice. And now we take this work outwards because leadership is not something you turn on when you're given a title. It is something you build from the inside out. And that is what conscious leadership is. Conscious leadership is not about charisma. It is not about control. It is not about making the perfect decision every time. It is about being anchored in your own awareness so that the way you lead others is an extension of how you lead yourself. It's when your presence becomes your power, not because you speak the loudest, but because you listened deeply. Not because you have the answer, but because you know how to meet the moment with intention. And there's something invaluable that we are able to accomplish when we move through life as a conscious leader. The way you lead others will be consciously also. And when you're aware of your own internal emotional landscape, your own patterns, your own disruptions, you become so much more attuned to what others are carrying also. You begin to see when someone is operating from a halt state, hesitating, avoiding, shrinking, when a colleague's reactivity is more about fear than disrespect. When a team member is emotionally withdrawn, not because they're disengaged, but because they're overwhelmed. And because you recognize that, you now lead differently. You don't react, you respond. You don't mirror their dysregulation. You model what grounded leadership truly looks like. That's what we're talking about today. We will explore how the tools we've already built, the SIRE model with the HALT, RISE, and SHIFT frameworks, become the blueprint for how you show up and how you communicate and how you guide others through complexity and uncertainty and growth. If you're ready to build and strengthen one of the most effective leadership assets you can have, stay with me. And let us start with the recognition that leadership is not about being in charge. It is about being in alignment. It is about who you are bringing to the table as the authentic you. It is not about who speaks first, who decides fastest, or who has the most answers. It is about who is most present, who is the most integrated, who is the most aligned in the moment decisions are being made. Conscious leadership is about being connected to your own self, and so that how you lead reflects who you truly, authentically are, not who you're expected to be, not who you perform as under pressure, but who you are with clarity, integrity, and with presence. This kind of leadership is not performative, it is relational. It is not fueled by urgency or optics, it is guided by intention. And this is where the SIRE model becomes the foundation for every leader who wants to lead with purpose and presence. Now, let's take a moment to look at how these four inner capacities shape you as a conscious leader. The first one is self-awareness. A conscious leader begins with the ability to observe their own internal world, to track their own bias, to see the edges of their thinking, to know what their response is shaped by clarity and when it's shaped by fear. Self-awareness allows you to notice your impact before someone else has to point it out to you, to name it for you. It helps you stay curious, not just about your team, but about yourself. It keeps you accountable without shame and receptive without fragility. This is where leadership becomes rooted because if you can't see yourself clearly, you cannot respond to others with clarity. Second is self-inspiration. This is your energy source. Self-inspiration is the internal spark that reconnects you with your why, not just in work, in how you show up. It's what helps you lead with purpose and without the need for external validation. It's what keeps you from chasing approval and instead helps you lead with alignment to your values. When you're inspired from within, your motivation is sustainable. You model passion, not as a performance, but as a clear connection to your meaning. And 3, next comes self-regulation. This is where leadership is either built or broken. Self-regulation is what allows you to pause before reacting, to hold space under pressure, to respond with discernment instead of defensiveness. It's what keeps your nervous system grounded in challenge. It's what helps your team feel safe, not because the situation is easy, but because your energy as the leader is steady. A leader who regulates does not suppress emotion. They channel it with clarity. And finally, the fourth is self-expression, not just in communication, but in how your presence impacts others. Your energy, your tone, your choice of words, your body language, the space you create or close in every conversation. Self-expression is where the inner work of SIRE becomes relational. It's how you make others feel seen and safe and heard, not by pleasing them, but by being fully present and deeply honest. This is where trust is built through consistency. When these 4 elements are integrated and practiced, you're no longer embodying leadership as an idea. You're leading through your alignment, through your choices, through your moment-to-moment awareness. And that's what makes a conscious leader different. You don't have to just manage the outcomes. You move in a way that makes others feel safe to show up fully because you are rooted in the clarity of who you are. And when you're rooted in the clarity of who you are, in your self-awareness, your inner drive, your emotional steadiness, and your authentic expression, you begin to lead differently. But we also know this. Our internal clarity does not guarantee calm in our external environment. Intention does not remove pressure in our external environment. And even the most grounded leaders still face stress, misalignment, and tension in themselves and in their teams. And that is why we have HALT, RISE, and SHIFT as practices that support conscious leadership in motion. They help you sustain the SIRE model, not just in quiet reflection, but in real-time leadership moments that require presence, emotional intelligence, and decision-making under pressure. In our episode today, I will not go into depth of each of these frameworks. If you have not already done so, I would encourage you to listen to episode 11, where we covered this in depth in conscious presence and peace. In our episode today, I want us to move into a practical application of a real-world leadership scenario. So now let's step into what that could look like. how these three frameworks become real in a moment of leadership challenge. And for that, let's take the example of team tension. Imagine you're leading a team and the energy is off. And I say team tension, this can apply to both personal life as well as work. It's just a group you're interacting with or you're leading. Maybe there's an unspoken tension in the room. It could be a missed deadline, it could be a communication breakdown, it could be the absence of effective collaboration. No one's quite naming it, but you can feel it. The withdrawal, the edge, the defensiveness. And here's the crossroad, the moment that defines conscious leadership. Do you project your own stress onto the team? Or do you pause, tune in, and lead with presence? The framework of HALT asks of you, before you lead others, lead yourself. You feel the pressure rising, the part of you that wants to fix it fast. But you've trained yourself to notice, I'm hesitating, I'm irritated, I'm tired. This isn't presence. This is a HALT state. And this is where self-leadership begins. You pause to recognize your own energy before it leaks into the room. You ask, am I bringing clarity or control? Is it my frustration about this moment or about what I've been carrying silently? This is where you choose not to react. You choose to recenter. Now that you've come back to yourself, you have a decision to make. With the RISE framework, you begin to create a culture of awareness. You ask, how do I help this team? How can I help whoever I'm working with? RISE becomes your approach to guiding the group without shame or blame, just clarity. You might say, I can feel there's some heaviness here, and I want us to pause, not to assign blame, but to check in. What's happening for each of us right now? What is making it hard for us to move forward? What you're doing is creating psychological safety, not by avoiding the tension, but by holding space for it. You help them recognize what they're feeling. Set a collective intention. Let's reconnect to what we are building here. Ground in the present moment. Reflect on what's pulling the team out of sync. That's RISE in real time, in action, not just within you, but now you've extended it in how you lead the room. Now that awareness is present, now that truth has been invited in, you guide the team through the next framework, shift, which asks of you to lead the path to realignment for all. You help them stop the pattern. Let's reset. This isn't how we want to work together. Highlight what's real. We've been assuming intent that may not be true. Integrate new awareness. Let's agree on how we will all communicate going forward. You bring flow into action. Here's what we'll try this week. We'll check in after. And finally, you trust the process. You don't over control, you hold space, knowing this is the consistency that will make the culture stick. This is what conscious leadership look like. You didn't walk in with a perfect script. You walked in with presence and used it to shape the energy of the room, because when you practice HALT, RISE, and SHIFT as a leader, you don't just guide outcomes. You're guiding an emotional climate. You're operating with emotional intelligence. You build trust by showing that awareness isn't just personal, it's cultural. And this is leadership that transforms everything that surrounds you. What I've shared with you across these past episodes, the SIRE model and the frameworks, the HALT, RISE, and SHIFT frameworks that make the SIRE actionable, were all born out of insights and lessons learned from lived experience. in my personal growth, my corporate leadership journey, and my coaching work with leaders across industries. And it did not all arrive all at once. It evolved over time, shaped by what I witnessed, what I lived, and what I helped others return to. The very first spark that started this journey towards the SIRE model came from what I was recognizing was happening around me. There were leaders who were in high level roles or who were technically skilled, intelligent, and even well intentioned. But they struggled because they led from reaction, not reflection. They made decisions with urgency, they avoided discomfort, they projected, they over controlled or emotionally disconnected. And though you and I will never know their own unique stories or their reasons of why and how they got to be how they are, the result of what they demonstrated was that they did not know how to stay in calm and presence when faced with scenarios that were complex, disruptive, or chaotic. I saw the cost of that misalignment in the culture, in the performance, and in the trust. And that lesson stayed with me. Then came my own lesson. I struggled at a certain point of time with over functioning, taking on too much, holding too much, trying to prove my worth, not by presence, but by effort, by output, by production, by what I could bring to the table. I didn't realize how deeply I equated value with what I could do or what I could carry until the weight of it began to disconnect me from my peace, from my clarity, from my capacity to lead me and others. That awareness shifted something in me. It showed me that presence is not passive, it's an act of courage, a form of self leadership that changes how we move and how we impact others. And then through coaching, it all began to clarify. I started seeing the moments leaders most needed support, when they felt triggered, misaligned, or disconnected from the way they wanted to lead. And I realized that while HALT, RISE, and SHIFT were powerful in the moment, they were speaking an incomplete story. Because without a foundation, without knowing what you're returning to, the tools cannot find the ground to take root. That is when the SIRE model revealed itself to me. SIRE gives leaders the structure of presence, of self awareness, of self inspiration, of self regulation, of self expression. It gives form to what they were actually leading themselves back into: awareness, purpose, regulation, aligned expression. And once that foundation was clear, I began using what would become HALT, RISE, and SHIFT. And I watched the impact unfold in real time. When leaders halted, they stopped projecting and started noticing. When they moved to rise, they anchored, clarified, and reconnected to purpose. And when they shifted, they didn't just act differently, they led differently. Their presence changed the emotional climate in the room. Their self leadership created space for others to show up more fully. Their alignment created influence that did not need to be forced because it was felt. This was not just a method anymore. It was becoming a practice, a rhythm, a complete blueprint for conscious leadership, one that began within and rippled outward. And as we wrap up today's episode, I want to offer all of us a gentle reflection. Conscious leadership does not come to us from having all the answers. It comes from learning how to stay with ourselves. so you can meet others from a place that's real and steady. Today, we looked at how the SIRE model becomes a foundation for that kind of leadership and how the HALT, RISE, and SHIFT framework support you when the pressure rises in the moment, when presence feels far away, or when you're holding space for others who might not be able to name what they're feeling. And whether it's a difficult meeting, a tough decision, or a moment when everything feels like too much, this rhythm of returning to yourself before leading others changes everything, not just in how you lead, but in how others experience your leadership. Because when you show up with clarity and presence, you create a space where others feel safe to do the same. And if growth remains our intention, we know one thing we must do is keep learning. Because even with the best frameworks, it is easy to drift, to forget what we know, to fall back into familiar patterns. That's where self reflection becomes so powerful, not as something we do once in a while, but as a quiet, consistent rhythm, something that helps us stay in tune with who we are becoming and how we are showing up along the way. So, next week in episode 13, we go into the superpower of self reflection. We'll talk about how this simple, steady practice helps reinforce everything that we're building together, from presence to peace to purposeful leadership. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Gayatri, and I'm so grateful you're here. So until next time, keep growing, keep returning to yourself, and keep choosing presence in your life, your leadership, and all of the moments in between.